Hi class, in this video we are going to discuss graphing exponential functions. Particularly, we are going to discuss the graph of f of x is equal to b raised to x if b is greater than 1, and the graph of f of x is equal to b raised to x if b is between 0 and 1. Then from the graph, we are going to identify the domain, range, intercepts, zeros, and asymptote of an exponential function. This time, let's have our example number 1. Let's sketch the graph of f of x is equal to 2 raised to x. So for this, we are going to construct the table of values by finding the values of our f of x when we try to substitute the values of our x in our function. So, tulad lang din po ng ating ginagawa usually sa evaluation of function, we just evaluate or replace the values of x with the corresponding values na meron tayo. So, let's start with our negative 4. So, that is f of x, f of negative 4 equal to 2 raised to negative 4. And then, if you can still recall yung ating lesson regarding po sa definition of exponents or basic rules or basic laws of exponents, meron tayo dong isa na if you have a raised to negative n, what you're going to do to make the exponent positive is to get the reciprocal of a raised to negative n. So, the reciprocal is 1 over a raised to positive n. So, tulad lang din po ng ating definition, gawin po natin ito sa ating 2 raised to negative 4. So, magiging reciprocal, you will have 1 over 2 raised to 4. And 2 raised to 4 is 2 times 2 times 2 times 2. That is equal to 1 over 16. Then, let's continue. We have 1 over 16. We have negative 3. So, that is 2 raised to negative 3. Reciprocal. You have 1 over 2 raised to 3. And 1 over 2 raised to 3 is 1 over 8. Next, f of negative 2, you have 2 raised to negative 2 equal to 1 over 2 raised to positive 2. Then we have 1. Then 2 raised to 2 is equal to 4. So we have 1/4. And f of x is, when our x is negative 1, so we have the function of negative 1 equal to 2 raised to negative 1. Same lang. Get the reciprocal, 1 over 2. Then 1 over 2 ang ating sagot. And we have f of, or function of 0 is equal to 2 raised to 0. So, another definition or basic laws in exponent na meron tayo, nireview natin last time, is that if you have a raised to 0, ang magiging equal daw nito is 1. So, any number, any variable that is raised to 0, the answer is 1. Do not forget itong ating dalawang definitions. So, you have 2 raised to 0. So, therefore, it is equal to 1. Then, let's continue. Function of 1 is equal to 2 raised to 1. So, this is simple. 2 raised to 1 is 2 times itself. Isang beses na naman. So, that is equal to positive 2. Then, we have f of 2 or function of 2. You have 2 raised to 2, which is 2 times 2 equal to 4. Next, function of 3 is equal to 2 raised to 3. 2 raised to 3 is 2 times 2 times 2. That is equal to positive 8. And lastly, we have f of, or function of 4 is equal to 2 raised to 4. That is 2 times itself 4 times, which is equal to 16. So now that we have completed our table of values, so we can now identify our points. So start tayo with our negative 4. So we will have negative 4, comma, 1 over 16. Then another point is we have negative 3, comma, 1 over 8. Next, we have negative 2, comma, 1 over 4. Next, negative 1, comma 1 half. Next is 0, comma 1, another point. Then, dun tayo sa positive, we have 1, comma 2, 2, comma 4. Continue natin. We will have 3, comma 8. And lastly, 4, comma 16. So, if we try to plot these points, itong points natin to our Cartesian plane, ito po ang magiging result ng ating graph. Now, let's identify each point. So, we have here 3, comma 8. 3, comma 8. Next, we have 2, comma 4. So, 2, comma 4. Next, 1, comma 2. This point is 0, comma 1. Then, punta tayo sa negative side ni x. We have negative 1, kalahati. So, this is point negative 1, 1 half. Next, negative 2. So, we have negative 2, comma 1 over 4. Then, next, you have negative 3. Let's put an arrow para ma-emphasize natin yung points. Then, you have negative 3, comma 1 over 8. And, we have, lastly, is negative 4, comma 1 over 16. So, ayan. Ayan po yung itsura ng graph ng ating function f of x is equal to 2 raised to x. Now, let's identify the domain, range, intercepts, zeros, and asymptote of our graph. Now, let's identify the domain and range of our function. So, for us to easily understand and identify the domain and range, let's examine its graph kapag po gumamit tayo ng ating GeoGebra. So, ito po yung ating graph for f of x is equal to 2 raised to x. So, tulad lang din po siya ng ating example pero naka-zoom out lang. Now, let's check for the domain. So, when you say domain, these are the possible values of x that we could input or evaluate in our function. So, are there any boundaries or limitation po na makikita ba natin sa ating domain or sa ating x values? Meron po ba? So, let's check muna dito sa ating positive infinity. So, let's see. As you can observe, ayan, pag zoom out natin, that the line in our y continues to increase as our x increases without bound. So, as our x goes to positive infinity, our values of y also increases exponentially. So, meron siyang value. Nagko-correspond siya sa isang value ng y. So, may isang value ka ng x, may isang value ka rin ng y for positive infinity. So, wala tayong limitation when our x increases without bound. Now, let's check our x when it decreases or approach negative infinity. So, ayan na. From our 0, 0, let's see or let's examine our x. So, as we zoom out, mapapansin natin na yung line ay nagko-continue papuntang negative x. However, it doesn't mean that, ayan po, no, as you zoom out, it doesn't mean that this graph or this line crosses or touches our x-axis. Ayan, no? Napapansin nyo? As we zoom out, hindi po siya nagtatouch, approaching lang. So, as our x decreases, our y also decreases. And we can observe that they have a one-to-one function or relation. So, therefore, we can say that there is no limitation with our negative infinity for the values of x. So, therefore, from here, we can conclude that our domain are the set of real numbers or negative infinity, comma, positive infinity, or using set builder notation, x such that x is an element of a real number. Before we proceed with our range, kanina, no, while examining the domain or identifying the domain of our function, meron tayong isang napansin, which is yung ating horizontal asymptote. So, mapapansin po natin, balikan lang natin yung ating graph, that, ayan, no, as we have our x in positive and in negative, mapapansin mo po na nasa taas sila ng ating x-axis or nasa taas sila ng ating line or asymptote, which is y is equal to 0. So therefore, we can also conclude that you have an horizontal asymptote, which is y is equal to 0. For our range, let's go back to our graph. So for our range, these are the outcomes or possible outcomes when we try to substitute the values of our x in our function. So we are going to look at our y-axis. So ayan, no? Mapapansin mo by looking at our graph that first thing is nasa taas siya ng ating x-axis. Then, aside from that, na meron siyang boundary. And that is the line y is equal to 0. And the rest of our y values are papunta ng taas. So, approaching sa ating positive infinity ng ating y. So, nasa above x-axis siya. So, most likely, ang nagiging values ng ating y is positive number. So, therefore, we can say that our range is based from our horizontal asymptote. Yun yung nag-set ng boundary sa ating graph. So, we have 0, going positive. So, that is, positive infinity. Or, y, such that y is an element of a real number wherein y is greater than 0. So, aside from identifying the domain, range, and the horizontal asymptote of our graph, we can also conclude from the graph that there is no vertical asymptote. So, ayan po, no? Dahil nga po ang ating domain are negative infinity and positive infinity, so therefore, definitely, we don't have a boundary and we don't have our vertical asymptote. Now, let's identify the intercept of our graph. So, upon checking, ayan, mas mabilis nating malalaman yung ating mga intercepts upon checking the graph itself. So, when you say x-intercept, this is a point wherein, a specific point wherein yung ating graph at yung ating x-axis will intersect. As well as sa y-intercept, ganun din, a point wherein your y-axis and your graph will intersect. So, dito, ayan, obviously, as you can see, and as examined, as indicated above, in our domain and range, that our domain is 0 to positive infinity or the values of our y is greater than 0. So, obviously, nasa taas siya ng ating x-axis or nasa taas siya ng ating horizontal asymptote na y is equal to 0. So, therefore, for our x-intercept, obviously, that we don't have our x-intercept. We can also conclude that also we don't have our 0. For y-intercept, ayan, let's look at our y-axis. And we have our point 0, 1. So, our y-intercept is equal to 1 or 0, 1. So, that's it po for the properties of our graph f of x is equal to b raised to x or when our b is greater than 1.